Hello everyone, I'm Ffxiv, and in this video we're going to talk about dragons, pixies, and the passage of time, just as the video title says. Now, it's something that I found really interesting as I was playing through the Shadowbringers MSQ and just learning more about the lore and the story and stuff like that, and I would love to know what you guys think about this as well, so make sure to leave a comment. Also, if you like this type of video, make sure to drop a subscribe below because there will be plenty more of these discussion type videos coming up here in the near future, talking about the MSQ and lore and all this other stuff. Now, with that all being said, let's get right into it. Now, there will be spoilers in this video, so if you don't want something spoiled and you haven't finished the MSQ, now would probably be a good time to click off. I would also like to point out that I have not researched this topic beyond what I've learned in-game currently, and I've done that for a very specific reason. I don't want to spoil myself on any of this stuff as I'm going through the story. I don't know what I might find as I'm doing this research, so stuff like that will have to wait until after I've finished the MSQ. Alright, so I had this thought when I was playing through the Shadowbringers MSQ, and the Fae King was talking about how the Fae experience the passage of time because they live for eternity, and it kind of reminded me of how Ffxiv was explaining the same thing in the Heavensward expansion, and he was talking about Nidhogg and why Nidhogg was still mad and completely like hellbent and out of his mind for revenge after 1,000 years of this war. And it was because dragons themselves live such long lives that they may as well be experiencing 1,000 years in a single moment. So 1,000 years to them is like 5 minutes. It's kind of weird to think about, but when you think about like if somebody lives 100 years, 10% of their life is 10 years. But if somebody lives 1,000 years, 10% of their life is the entire life of that other person. And as you go through life, years seem to kind of, they go faster and faster. So if you're living for thousands of years, it may feel like 1,000 years could be 5 minutes if you're somebody who's 30,000 years old. Nobody's ever lived that long, so we wouldn't know exactly how somebody might experience time in that way, but it could essentially be something similar to that feeling, where 1,000 years might actually be or feel like 5 minutes, which is kind of crazy to think about. It's not actually that way, but it's kind of just how the mind would like recognize the passage of time. And then what struck me as kind of crazy was when the Fae King then was talking about how they experience time. The king said essentially, we live forever, so there's no sense in remembering the past. There's no sense in thinking about the future. We live in this moment only. So whatever's going on right now is the only thing that matters. Nothing in the past matters. Nothing in the future matters because their past is infinite and their future is infinite, right? So that's kind of how they look at it. It's like, if you're going to have an infinity of moments, then the future moments don't matter because you're going to experience like everything eventually, right? So focusing only on what's going on currently is what matters. And they don't hold grudges. They don't do all this stuff because they only focus on the moment. They don't look into the past. They don't look into the future. And it was crazy to me because I noticed that immediately. It's like, wait a second. The dragons live forever, or pretty close to it, essentially. I don't know if they actually live forever, but they live for a very, very long time. And so do the Fae. And it's their life experiences and the way that they experience time is so fundamentally different. It just kind of blew my mind in that moment. I was like, wait a second. This is weird. And I'm wondering now if, as I'm going through the MSQ, is this something, what did they plan this out? Did they forget how they described the dragon's passage of time? Did they put this in there on purpose to see if anybody caught this, if people would notice? Is it something that they were thinking about intentionally? And it kind of makes me wonder what they were trying to portray in this. And it could just be because of the way that the Fae, especially the Pixies, for example, the way that they are born into being is completely different than the way that the dragons are formed. I'm not 100% sure how the dragons are formed. I'm assuming some level of like normal procreation with eggs and stuff like that. I'm assuming that's how dragons are. Again, like I said, I haven't done any research on this actual topic because I don't know what I'll find, and I don't want to spoil something that I might actually learn through the normal story. Anyways, uh, but the Fae specifically and the Pixies, even more specifically, I should say, are born into being because of children who lost their lives prematurely, and that's why they like to play. That's why they're uh, focused on just having fun, and it kind of makes sense to like their minds are very childlike. So it's like because their minds are very childlike, they would experience time in that way. If a child were to live forever, eternity as a child without their mindset ever changing, that's kind of how I would expect a child to experience time. And thinking about it, it could just be that they put a lot of thought into just like these beings live forever, and this is how they experience time based on their experiences. Pixies experience time in this way because they're basically children at heart. Dragons experience time in this way because they go through the passage of time essentially how a mortal would, or a mortal would, only they live forever. And everybody knows pretty much that the longer you live, the faster time goes by. I've noticed specifically myself, like when I think back to like when I was 5 years old, a month or a week felt like forever. Like it felt like it would never end. And now it feels like a year is essentially the same as a month back when I was a child. It's kind of that comparison. It just feels like the years just kind of vanish. And as that happens and as you get older, it would only make sense that if you were a dragon and you were living for tens of thousands or more, however many years, I don't know how old Eorzea is or how old the dragons are exactly, but if you were living thousands of years, it would make sense that the passage of time would then become 100 years feels like an instant. 1,000 years feels like 5 minutes, and you would eventually get to that point, which is kind of terrifying to think about. That you would get to the point where eternity feels like it happens all at the same time, and uh, it's kind of weird to think about. It's almost like I would prefer going through life the way that the Pixies do, in how they experience time, because you would be able to focus just on the moment rather than all of time altogether. And yeah, speaking of which, I'm assuming most of the Fae experience time similarly, um, but I'm not 100% sure. I think the Fwoth experience time similar to the Pixies, but they come into creation or come into being in a very similar way to the Pixies do, which would be dying. They're beings that drowned. That's like people that died via like a water-based death that was terrible, end up becoming Fwoth in some cases, and uh, they're born back into being without their memories, and they're very mischievous, and they're like constantly like, and it's mischievous in a bad way, whereas the Pixies is kind of more of like a fun but kind of creepy way, where they're like turning people into the like hedges and stuff like that, and they call them their children, which is it is creepy. But the Fwoth are like devious and evil, and you would kind of expect somebody who died in a way that the Fwoth did to act that way. So it's very interesting that they put so much thought into how these characters and these races act, how they experience the passage of time, just based on their mindset and how they were created and the depth that went into the stuff. Like it's way more world building and character building and race building, I guess, than I would expect from pretty much any story. This is like a story in itself, just the creation of the Pixies and how they experience time and all that stuff. Like you could literally write a book on just the Pixies based on what we've learned of them in Shadowbringers already. It's kind of crazy to think about, but I thought that juxtaposition and how fundamentally different the Pixies experience time and the dragons experience time, even though they both essentially live for eternity, was something that was really interesting, and the difference in the characters is, like, as I'm talking about it more, it's kind of like bringing to reality in my mind how much time they spent on the story to make it feel so immersive because of the difference of characters. Because they could have easily just never talked about the passage of time, and I don't know. It's something that just interests me so much that they put that much effort into it, and I'm really glad that I was able to kind of pick up on stuff like that. And the more I play through the story, the more small little things here and there, I'm like, oh, there was that, and there's that. Most of them don't really warrant a video, but uh, there's a whole bunch of like really cool little things that they put into the story that like go back and forth, and they make the world feel more full. And speaking of this, though, back onto the passage of time, what do you guys think of the Pixies' passage of time and the dragons, and how they compare to each other, and the Pixies' mindset and the dragons' mindset, and how that kind of clashes, even though they both live forever? Why do they experience time differently? Why, would the Pixies not eventually grow in their mindset to be more like the dragons, instead of just forever being like, no, we only care about this moment? You know, a fresh pixie, for example, you would kind of expect to experience time in just this moment, but then after thousands of years, start to become more and more like the dragons, become more jaded and all this other stuff, but they never change. They're stuck in that childlike mindset. Uh, and it kind of makes me wonder, you know. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. I know I didn't really like shine any light on this, I guess. It's probably not even a question that anybody's ever really asked about the game, to be completely honest. But I thought it was really interesting. And yeah, if you guys like this kind of video, let me know. I will be making more of these if you do. And yeah, I will see you in the next one.